It's Wellness Wednesday. Yes, this is my second crack at Wellness Wednesday this week because apparently I re-uploaded the wrong video first time. Rush from Rosh Hashanah. That was an unintentional bad pun. So I'm back from, well, we're in the middle of the week of contemplation. And I was going to do a video on mental health stigma for today. I am now doing a video on mental health stigma today. And a couple things happened right before I sort of signed off for, Monday night into Tuesday night that added to my thoughts and how I want to approach this. Because mental health stigma is a serious thing, but it's also something that is very easily used to hand wave away bad behavior. And this idea that if someone has a diagnosis, they can never be called on their shit because that's mental health stigma is something that furthers mental health stigma. Let me do the help support this channel and I will explain. Help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/Leanna K, and like and subscribe to this channel if you like this content. Now, again, I say this as somebody with a diagnosis. I was diagnosed with PTSD in late 2012. Late 2012 into 2013. Early 2013, I started seeing the therapist that diagnosed me in 2012. But it takes a bit of time to get like the right diagnosis. And I actually had to ask. And there is a lot of stigma surrounding people with PTSD. It used to be that you'd go postal and go crazy and you were violent and you hurt people because you just snapped. That doesn't seem to be the stereotype anymore. Now it's just you're made of glass and, you're hysterical and you can't be believed because, you're just having flashbacks. And none of that is true in my case. It is true that if you do not do the work, if you are not regulated, certain things can kind of compound and collapse. So, something that happens in the present sticks to something in the past. And this is why I am very, very vigilant about sticking to what I know, not what I assume or what I'm afraid of. And that's why I make a big distinction between I think and I feel, because feelings are always valid. Opinions and behaviors are not. And unfortunately, the people who, I do believe they're in the minority, but they are very loud and very amplified by the internet, who use the idea of mental health stigma to try to get away with bad behavior that they actually did do. That actually increases the mental health stigma for people who aren't utter asshat terrible people on top of having a diagnosis. A diagnosis is not a character flaw. So good people with a diagnosis are still good people. Bad people with a diagnosis are still bad people. But the diagnosis itself doesn't make you good or bad. And we cannot help our emotional reactions to things. We can help having self-control and not making the same mistakes again and again and again. And when you let a mentally ill person just shit the bed again and again and again and again, and they keep getting these negative consequences to the things they do and don't, in some cases, don't understand why. In some cases, just stubbornly refuse to admit this is a bit difficult to explain, but I'm going to try. There's this period where like you intellectually get told that you have a particular condition. And you can repeat, yeah, I have, in my case, PTSD. CPTSD specifically, but CPTSD is not a billing code, and therefore it's not an official diagnosis. But the difference is PTSD is you were in a very severe accident, or you, it was a one-time thing. And after a few months, you're still not, you're still stuck in that one-time thing. That is simple PTSD. Complex PTSD is basically you had a really shitty childhood, and so you can't really separate a few things. It's everything. It can literally be like a hyperactive nervous system. And so sometimes all I can do is go, your body's having a reaction. You don't have to do anything about it right now. What I end up telling myself is, you're not a kid anymore. You're an adult now. People can't just do anything they want to you. And, I posted a pretty nasty threat I got last week, from, an anonymous person, though the language is pretty clear who it was. And it's interesting because all of the people cyber stalking me now know I have a diagnosis. And they have their own deals. And they love to push every button they know I have. And in some cases, I told them, the things you are doing are, triggering these conditions. You have every right to do them, but I can't be around this. And they just keep doing it, and then they accuse me of mental health stigma. And, I've found personal conversations, private conversations I had with people on stalker blogs. So either they posted them somewhere and the stalker got it, or they sent it directly to them. And that's fun. It doesn't, I don't think it makes me look bad at all. In fact, the more people release of the private conversations I've had with them that they think is some gotcha, it just shows them telling the truth. But that takes a certain amount of logicking through. That's the cognitive behavioral work, right? Like, because the immediate emotional reaction is, oh my God, because it's a real violation when someone releases private conversations, especially private conversations where you do the adult thing and say, hey, that hurt. The fact that people release it and it really looks like spite, I'm not going to speculate as to the motivations of some of these people, but spite is sort of a continuing thing. How dare you? You're not going to stop talking to me. I'm going to ruin you until, and the thing that all these stalkers do is, you can stop this. You can stop this as long, basically if you disappear, Leanna, this can all stop. That is a horrendous thing to do to someone with PTSD. But it is also free speech, until certain lines are crossed and it is a credible threat. People are allowed to lie about me. People are allowed to try to ruin me. People are, this is allowable speech. But then they turn around and accuse me of mental health stigma because I set boundaries regarding their behavior. That is not mental health stigma. Mental health stigma is assuming someone is going to do something just based on their diagnosis without any direct evidence that they are symptomatic in this way. It is not going, okay, you're not agreeing to work on any of this stuff, meaning it's very likely going to happen again. This is damaging to my business. I have to cut the cord here. But there's a gray area there, right? And this is the problem with stigma. It will always exist in some form, and it affects everyone. And this is where my way of approaching this really deviates from the standard talking points out there. Because depending on the environment you're in, different stigmas apply. I talk on Manly Mondays all the time about, the idea that a man can't be a perfectly good daycare worker or kindergarten teacher, for instance, because he is a man is stigma. That's nonsense, right? There is something stigmatized about every state of being, and they change over time. And having a holistic understanding of how stigma works means understanding the heuristics our brain does. And, the only way we reduce it is for every single individual doing the work and going, okay, am I making this decision based on what I know of the person versus what I am assuming about this person because of a label? And if you're like, okay, it's sort of on the line, I'm seeing some yellow flags here that could be something, no one can be expected to just blow themselves up to avoid mental health stigma. That's just not fair. So what you do is like, okay, let's put in some guidelines. Let's make an agreement. Let's be really clear going forward what is agreed upon acceptable conduct in this regard and what the pre-agreed upon consequences of breaking this agreement are. Now, the people accusing me of mental health stigma would not agree to that. That's the way you do it. I got that from experts in cluster B personality disorders, specifically borderline personality disorder, because, when I talk to these experts, they deal with the fact that these are very challenging conditions. And the problem with the literature is that it's written of try to validate the feelings, don't blame, da-da-da-da-da. That's for people who still want to try with the person in question. One of the reasons that histrionic personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, these sorts of things, and the lines between those three are very, very blurry. That's why they're clustered into one kind of group. The reason it is a disorder is because of the havoc that these conditions wreak on relationships. And no one is required to continue to be on the receiving end of someone's, disordered rage, for instance, because they have, the thing that changed this is this comment did not come from a stalker. They stalk this content and freak out whenever they feel falsely accused. Ironic that. But this came from somebody else who, in a conversation with me said, I have BPD. What do you want from me? And that was just, it was a moment, because to me, the answer was obvious, right? The answer was, I want to see some evidence that, one, the person understands what that means. Two, is really working on it. Three, isn't looking for a carte blanche, a blank check to just, behave in a disordered, unregulated way. It takes time. It's a process. I know myself. I will start feeling more symptomatic, and I know I got to step back and I got to get regulated again. That's my responsibility. I can only hope that the people around me understand. And of course, the people stalking me use every PTSD stigma in the book. I'm dangerous. I'm conniving. They've even claimed that I control blue sky moderation processes and I can manipulate the police. It's just, I wish I had the power and influence that these people think I do, but I don't. It's absurd. I'm not that important. And that humbling process that is required to go from, I can repeat that I have this diagnosis, trickling down into accepting what it really means. That's hard, because there are things that you recognize you cannot indulge in yourself. And you can't indulge it because, okay, you are allowed this thing, which cuts you off from all these other things, like, for instance, gainful employment, friends, stable relationships, all that stuff. Or you get all these other things because you curb this reaction, not internally, but externally. And because I know that work is doable, because I do it, that doesn't mean I never make mistakes. There are plenty of times. It happens like every 3 or 4 months where I realize, because I eat a lot of shit. And because I do work, I'm really good friends with people with diagnosed personality disorders. And I know that the people that I'm friends with these things would not want me to lie to them and tell them something was true that wasn't true. I would not want somebody to tell me something is okay that isn't okay. Because if you deal with it right away, then it's relatively small. If you say, oh no, it's okay, and then 3 to 6 months later, it really wasn't okay, and you have to admit you lied because you just didn't want to have the argument, well, that's devastating to people who have certain not personality disorders, other conditions, but some personality disorders. The less talked about other two, the kind of schizoaffective cluster, and then the OCD cluster. Those two get left out of all these discussions. And that's why when people say personality disorder, you're lumping in someone with, say, avoidant personality disorder or schizoaffective disorder with, the stuff that gets all the attention in crime TV shows. And they're not the same. They're not the same at all. And so, part of our language, and it's not somebody's fault. We use sort of these shorthands, especially when we're really frustrated with dealing with somebody's behavior. And that's a little stigmatizing. That can make people feel really bad. I did it to a friend of mine I caught myself immediately. Thank God I started talking about, personality disorder, cluster B personality disorders, because this person was not on cluster B. And no one is quicker to tell you, oh yeah, there are things we have to watch, than a person who is taking their diagnosis seriously. Now, the important thing to recognize about a diagnosis is there's no blood test for PTSD the way there's a blood test for my autoimmune disease, right? These are collections of symptoms, and it's like, okay, if you're in this collection, then this is the treatment that tends to work best. And getting too hung up on these diagnoses isn't really useful, because whether you have histrionic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder, the prescribed treatment is still dialectical behavior therapy. So, with somebody in a different cluster, I always mix up cluster A and cluster C, which is why I just say sort of the schizoaffective cluster. That's one that deals with, they say odd thinking, but what it really is like delusions. And it's a tough one, because that one, people just sort of have to, it is very similar to PTSD, and sometimes you just have to kind of take a minute and go, hold on, let's see if I still feel this way in 5 minutes, in 15 minutes, in an hour, tomorrow, all that stuff. Learning to ride certain things out, because your brain has a tendency to rebel on you. Royal you, no individual you. That takes a lot of discipline. It's hard at first. It does get easier with practice. And frankly, I think I'm a better person for doing the work and learning how to regulate better. And I wish this stuff was taught in schools, because quite frankly, it benefits everyone to not make assumptions, to not just, one of the things I had to learn is, okay, there are people out to get me. They're scheming. They're talking to each other. They're passing information back and forth. They're making, frequent claims that they've infiltrated my Discord server and are spying on me. But, we don't allow, stuff slips through because people don't break the rules, but we don't allow not safe for work stuff. And we have been just really, really, really cracking down on any suggestion that say any shooting is a good thing. And so, okay, maybe they're in there. There's nothing to find. And if they, they keep suggesting they have dirt on me, but I know based on the fact that I've seen what they put out there, if they had anything really damaging, they'd have used it. These are not people that hold on to things. It's just this running diarrhea of the keyboard. And so I have to, talk myself through these moments where I get really afraid that someone is going to take away everything I've built because they hate me. And I do it, and it's better off. And, it's worked so far, because when you do this stuff, when you don't make excuses for yourself, when you don't succumb to the disorder, people do respect that. I've gotten a lot of comments in the last few weeks that people are impressed with how I keep my head up. And that's all you can really do. And I admit it's why people trying to lecture me on freedom of speech really pisses me off, because if there's anybody who lives an acceptance and a support of free speech principles. It's me. The shit that people say about me, but it's legal. You know, you can't just defend the speech you like. You have to also defend the speech that you don't like. And that doesn't mean you have to condone the speech you don't like. And I mean, the fact that one of the people that accused me of mental health stigma, the thing that was the beginning of the end was a very stigmatizing statement they made towards somebody else. And but that's so typical, right? That I'm mad at you for checking me on my shit, so I'm going to accuse you of the very thing I did. Like, it's just bloody textbook. And they have the right to say it. I have the right to walk away. That's how free speech works. And I do think that, unfortunately, the kind of stigma crowd, right, tends to be more left-wing, and they tend to be a rather stigmatizing bunch themselves, right? Demonizing even the most moderate conservative, having horrible things to say about Christians. Comments like kill all men, die cis scum, you know, like none of that's okay. And that's where I really step away from left-wing activism. And then, I mean, the right is no better. I really don't need to talk about how the right's gone full mask off with the Jimmy Kimmel thing. And I mean, they got me to watch Jimmy Kimmel for the first time in ages last night. So, you know, and that's why I focus on people's behaviors, not their identity. I will give people a chance, even if I have some trepidations. It is about their individual behavior and their individual attitudes, and more importantly than anything, when I bother to tell them that something, you know, is giving me issues, not necessarily that I just don't agree with it. That's something I've actually decided to work on, is be a little less live and let live regarding behavior I consider to be bad with people, because I let it go on too long because I'm trying to, getting accused of stigma by people who engaged in stigma themselves and didn't like it when I called them on it. I mean, the comment in question was both, the person has a diagnosis and is transphobic. The person who called them the thing, which I will not repeat. Well, maybe I should. Because this is an example of stigma, right? This person in question called a trans woman with BPD manipulative. And they did not know this person well enough to draw that opinion of themselves as an individual that was preying on assumptions and stereotypes. And, you know, the idea that, and this may not have been in the person's mind when they said it. I think they were a little out of their mind at the moment. Because this was another person with BPD calling somebody with BPD who was also trans manipulative. And they actually said, my BPD was right, you're manipulative. And I was sitting here going, this is just a fire hose of, at the time I called it a fire hose of crazy being bananas, not insane. But that was actually me checking my swing. I should have called it a fire hose of wrong, because a major stigma against people with BPD is that they are manipulative. A major stigma against especially trans women is that they are manipulative. They are not who they say they are. They're just doing this because they're perverts trying to get into women's spaces, right? And again, this person didn't know this woman well enough to assess her character. And even then, when you're dealing with somebody with these conditions, pointing out how something either comes across as manipulative or is really manipulative. You're denying other people choices they otherwise would have. Manipulative is a loaded word, right? And so you got to be very careful as you use it. And I personally think that focusing on behaviors instead of summarizing the entire person as the problem is the better way to go. But the fact that this person who said you're manipulative to a BPD trans woman that they barely knew, then turned around and accused me of mental health stigma. Well, I'd say that's the pot calling the kettle black, but someone might accuse me of racism for that one. Like, this is where we're at, right? And the problem with it is that the term, that stigma is real. And like I said, everybody undergoes it. And unfortunately, because it's such an easy gotcha now, people just throw it out instead of paying attention to their own behavior. And again, I just think that if we focus on what's known, if we focus on facts, and we really check assumptions, then this whole issue becomes way easier to deal with on a case-by-case basis. Instead of just having these broad conversations about mental health stigma that, yes, can be used. I mean, it's like Inception, right? It's stigmaception, that I could say, look, throwing mental health stigma at me, the accusation of mental health stigma, because I referred to something in the colloquial meaning of crazy, because I was apologizing to the trans woman he attacked because she knew he associated with me. Actually, it was another trans woman he also went after. Notice a pattern here. But, you know, claiming that's mental health stigma, one could argue that's manipulative. That's manipulating a situation because this is now distracting from the reality of what he did, and two wrongs don't make a right. And we talk about manipulation as this crime of intent, and to an extent it is. The reason that calling a person with BPD manipulative as a character trait, as opposed to focusing on individual behaviors, is that when BPD is sort of centered in a really unstable sense of self and an intense fear of abandonment. And so the panic that ensues when there's a fear of abandonment can, you know, lead to manipulative behaviors, trying to force someone or coerce someone or guilt someone into staying, all of which are manipulations. But that doesn't mean the person is a manipulative person. There's no intent to manipulate. It is a panic response. And when you're super frustrated by a person who has had a symptomatic reaction again, that is a hard line to draw. And it's very important because, you know, one of the things that experts on these sorts of personality disorders talk about is these, you know, these cluster B conditions. When they find you've done something wrong, or they think you can get, they grind it in and grind it in and grind it in. And, you know, they're like, yes, I did do that. And I said I was sorry. I do not believe that the way you are treating me right now is fair. And I would like you to stop this. If you are upset about something, we can talk about that. but please stop blaming me. It's not productive. And that's an example of when a boundary is an opportunity. Is if you set a boundary and say, that's unacceptable to me. I will not accept continuing this line of conversation. We can talk about what's upsetting you, but lay off the blame. If they respect that and correct course, no problem, right? That's, yes, they have a condition. It makes things very difficult. But when it comes right down to it, they are owning their shit. If they blow past that boundary, well, everyone has to respect boundaries. And one of the things about serious mental illness, PTSD is one, is boundaries are the core of staying regulated. And if you don't model boundaries, you cannot expect the person who is still in a state of dysregulation to, if you're not modeling the behavior, how do you expect them to do it? And boundaries are hard, especially at first. When you set a boundary, certain malicious people will do everything they can to tear it down. That's why you have to stick to it. Because eventually people recognize that, no, you're not going to bend on these things. And you're more than willing to talk about how they felt. You're not willing to validate things that just aren't true. And motivations are a big one there. Saying you said something you did not say just to keep the peace is not recommended for dealing with people suffering from mental illness. And that's, if you are lying to someone, if you are telling them something that's not true because they are sick, that's mental health stigma. And trust me, as someone people did that to, it is crushing when you found out you've been lied to. Because it becomes this vicious cycle of, oh, you don't handle things well, you blow up. And you only find out something months later that was fixable at the time. But because you didn't know you couldn't fix it and you get upset about that, see, you don't take things well. Cannot stand that. And, it took me a long time to realize that that was not okay behavior. And that's why, for all the people that label me a bitch, at least people know what the issue is with me. They can ignore that all they want, but they knew what the problem was. And, the people that, again, I have had tough conversations with people who have personality disorders. Like, they're the first ones to go, what the hell are they on? When they accuse me of being terrible and not caring about people with personality disorders. Personality disorders are a very wide tent. And caring about someone does not mean you have to be at the mercy of their horrible behavior. In fact, caring about someone, part of it is you tell them as gently as possible when you think they're wrong, when you think their behavior is ultimately going to have a bad impact on their life. And it's hard to hear criticism. It's hard. As somebody who gets a lot of it, it's hard. And figuring out which criticism to listen to and which not to listen to is more of an art than a science. And again, that, does this person respect my boundaries? If so, I will listen to them. If not, and that doesn't mean I think they're right, but I'll give them a hearing. Someone who doesn't respect boundaries, no, I'm not going to listen to them because there's zero evidence that they have my best interests at heart, precisely because they don't respect boundaries. And I don't want to talk to you anymore is a boundary. So that's TLDR. Mental health stigma is real. Stigma affects everyone in some way. Focusing on facts and what is known And then, validating emotions, but not agreeing to things that, you don't believe are true just to stop the fight at the time. That is the way forward, because that separates the people who have unique challenges but are working on it from the people that are using things like accusations of stigma and I have this condition, I can't help it. As someone with a condition, you can help it. You can't help what's going on inside. You can learn to tell yourself different stories that help you better. You can learn restraint. And a big part of it is knowing your own limits and setting boundaries. So hopefully, during the Rosh Hashanah period, the point between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where people's bad behavior for the last year, if you don't make it right, is sealed in the book forever. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. That was a terrible segue. Patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/LeannaK. And like and subscribe to this channel. That helps me out without spending any money. Thanks for watching, and be well.